One thing you may be doing quite a bit in your affiliate account is boarding new merchants. And so there's a flow that you can go through in the UI to let you do this really easily. Right from the home page, we have an add merchant account. It's also in the main menu, but we'll just go to this page. And so at first you have to decide what sort of account are you boarding. Is it a standard account like a normal gateway? Is it a mobile only one where they're only going to be using iProcess? Or is it a test account and you're going to be just using this for testing? It's not actually going to run real transactions. And so the process is basically the same for all three of these. A test account is going to be a little different because it has standard services. There's no fees applied to it, so you don't have to do some of the steps. A mobile account only lets you add one credit card processor, and it doesn't have additional services, again, because it's only doing iProcess. So we're going to board a standard one in this demo. So I select that one, and then on page one, we have to just enter all of the merchants' basic information. So there's their company name right at the top, and then their external identifier. Now, their company name and external identifier could be different things. Your external identifier is optional, so you could just leave it blank. But basically, if they have a legal name and then a name that they're known by somewhere else, or if you want to have their gateway account show company name ABC, but you know them as XYZ, you could have ABC as the company name, so when the merchant logs in, that's what they'll see as their company name, but you can also search from your affiliate account under the external identifier to see them as that. So it's an additional way to show kind of an alternate name for the account. All the address information is just what you'd expect. And then the company contact is the primary contact for the merchant. Now, this is going to be who you're talking to the most. It's going to be their name, email address, and whatever you put here, this will be the person who gets the welcome email to their account. So once you're done creating the account, whatever email address you put for the company contact, that's the one who's going to get their welcome email, set a password, and get going in their account. That'll be the primary user for this merchant. Next up, you have to add some billing info. So just enter an account number and a routing number. And so these are going to be what NMI uses for billing the merchant. So the merchant's going to get monthly fees, and those are going to be billed to whatever account you enter here. Now, if you have a merchant who's international or you can't enter their actual bank information for some reason, you can go ahead and enter 123 123 123 for both the account number and the routing number, and then that'll accept it here. And what you'll want to do is contact NMI support to make sure that they allow you to enter a credit card for this one merchant. And so then you can put a credit card on file for them so that that overrides this. But you want to make sure you get that card on file before we actually run billing, because we will try to bill whatever's entered in these fields. So make sure you get that addressed soon after boarding the merchant. And then right down here, you enter the username for the primary user. So the username can be whatever you want it to be. It needs to be at least 4 characters long. And we'll do some validation on this field as you enter it to make sure that you enter a valid username. We'll even check existing accounts to make sure that username is available before you submit the form. So I'm going to go up and just fill out everything on this page. Okay, so now I'm ready to go to the next step. And so now you're going to tell us what sort of processing this merchant is going to be doing. Are they going to be processing credit cards, checks, cash, all three? You can deselect them, and now we'll only show you for credit cards. You can do these, whatever combination you want, you can select. I'm just going to do credit cards and cash. We'll skip check, but you should know checks are basically exactly the same as credit cards. Well, actually, I take it back. We'll do all three. So this will be pretty quick. So first, you can select what credit card processor you're trying to board. You can skip if you actually decide you want to skip credit card or check or cash. We'll allow that. And then we give you a drop down of here's all the credit card processing platforms that you have available to you. And so you can pick whichever one you want. If you do like TSYS, we're going to show you TSYS's information. If you do First Data Omaha, we'll do First Data Omaha's. If we go back to TSYS's real quick, you'll see we have some helpers to let you know like how long you should expect these things to be or what sort of validation runs on them. So that can help you out. I'm going to do First Data Omaha just because it's simple to set up. And so here's the merchant number from their tear sheet, their MID, whatever. You're going to find that when you get the MID for the account. You also need to set up an MCC code, so a merchant category code. And so this is going to let you pick a category for the account. You could like do their clothing store, and then we show you the MCCs eligible for that. Or if you happen to know it, just search for it. So I'm going to do 5999, and that's miscellaneous and specialty retail stores. So you can search for them, do whatever you want, but you just want to make sure a merchant category code is selected. You can classify an account, so we default to e-commerce for what sort of account it is, but you can also select retail, moto, or restaurant, whichever is relevant for the merchant. We're going to leave this as e-commerce. You may or may not see this, but depending on what sort of billing you have available, you can choose what sort of billing to do for the merchant account. So standard billing is what you'll have by default, and this is basically our standard billing method, nothing special. We also have multi-channel and card present only. And so if I do card present only, that's going to make it so that this credit card processing MID is only allowed to do card present transactions. They won't be able to key in anything. They won't be able to do any e-commerce. The benefit is that we will then allow you to set different processing rates for those transactions. So if you're charging merchants, for example, 10 cents per transaction, you can make it so that if they're doing card present only, maybe they're only paying 7 cents per transaction or something. You can make it cheaper for them if they're doing all card present transactions. And then there's multi-channel, which is kind of a combination of the two. That's going to be they're going to pay that 10 cents per transaction that's e-commerce, and they're going to pay 7 cents per transaction that's card present. So, and those numbers can be whatever you want them those to be. Those are just an example, but it's a kind of a combination of the two. So it gives them the ability to, if you'd like, pay less for transactions that are card present, but still pay the slightly higher fees for ones that are e-commerce. So I'm going to set it to standard, actually. You could do one of these. The setup is going to be exactly the same either way, but just for simplicity's sake for this demo, I'm going to do standard. Then you can choose what payment types are allowed. What credit card types are you going to allow on this MID? So you can deselect the ones you don't want them to use. Maybe they aren't configured for them, or they don't want to take them for some reason. In general, people want to leave all of these on, just not to limit the merchant, but you can restrict them if you'd like. Next up are account limitations, and so this is if you want to limit how much money the merchant can move through a MID per month or per transaction, you can do that here. So max monthly volume defaults to 0, which is unlimited. If you wanted to set a cap, maybe $10,000, you could do that. And if you wanted to set a max ticket amount, maybe you don't want them to ever run a transaction over $1,000, you could do that as well. So you can set these limits. These are hard limits. So if they try to run a transaction over $1,000, the gateway will block them from processing that. And if they run over $10,000 through the MID in the month, then we're going to block them as well. So if you are going to use these, make sure you know that they are hard limits and they will stop the merchant from processing. So I'm going to take both of these away because I don't want to have any limits on my merchant. Then you have an AVS and CVV pre-check method. And so this is kind of hard to explain, but it's basically if the merchant is using our AVS and CVV rules to block transactions, it's really how do we send that data to the processor. So void on decline is the default behavior. And basically what happens is if the merchant's running a $10 transaction, we will send the full $10 authorization to the processor. We'll get the AVS and CVV responses back. And then if the result is the address didn't match or the CVV didn't match and the merchant had a rule set up to block it in that case, then we would send a void back to the processor to say, actually void that $10 transaction. Now, the problem with that is that $10 has already run through their MID, so that could get them closer to this max monthly volume. And if they don't want that, if you don't want them to be able to kind of be in that situation where maybe a 10,000 transaction goes through, gets a rejection for an AVS rule, and then they void the transaction, in that case, you may want to select a separate pre-auth transaction. And in this case, we'll either do a validate, which is a $0 auth, or we'll do a $1 auth if the processor requires it for that initial AVS or CVV check. And then if that fails, then we only have to void the $1 auth, or in the case of the $0 validate, we don't have to do anything. And if it approves, then we actually just run the full transaction so that the merchant gets the full amount, the customer is charged once, and everything is good. So this can be whichever one you want. I'm going to leave void on decline as the default. We're getting close to the end of this page now. We've got duplicate velocity controls. And so we explain it here. Basically what this is it's a protection against the merchant accidentally running multiple transactions for the same person. So let's say the customer goes to a merchant's website, they start filling out a form to enter their payment information, they double click the submit button. If the merchant's website doesn't have their own protections in place to avoid double submissions, in theory that could run the transaction twice. And the odds are very high that the merchant doesn't want that. So what we do is allow the first transaction to go through, and then the second one that has the exact same credit card number and the exact same amount, and is a second later, we block that. So the customer is only charged once, the merchant only gets paid once, and that's exactly what the intention was, so that's good. You can disable this if you want. The default is 20 minutes, so this can be set to whatever you want in seconds. 20 minutes is a default, and it's what most people use. But you can turn that off if you know the merchant may have situations where they want to allow that. In general, though, we suggest leaving it on, and most affiliates do. Now, we do have this option to allow the merchant to override this. So if there is a case where the merchant wants to allow the person to pay the same thing twice within 20 minutes, you can just enable this, and that'll make it so in the virtual terminal in the merchant control panel, there's a new checkbox that says ignore duplicate checking, and in the API, there's a variable they can pass to say ignore any duplicate checking on this transaction. So you can turn that on or off depending on if you think the merchant will ever want to do that, and I'll just leave it on for this one. We're getting near the bottom now, and we have the merchant's required fields. So if you want to require the merchant to enter certain information on every transaction, this is where you can set that. So maybe you want every transaction to get AVS results, and so you want to include the address, city, state, and zip. Or maybe you just want the address and zip. Make sure those are in every single transaction so you can get AVS results. Maybe you want CVV results too, in which case you can go to here and do card security code is always required. So then you're forcing the merchant to enter these on every transaction. If they don't provide them, we'll throw an error and won't let them process. So these are, again, hard limits on the account. So you want to make sure that you're doing enough to make sure that they're getting the most value from their gateway, that they're being as safe as possible with accepting payments, but you also want to make sure that they aren't prevented from running transactions that they would want to were it not for these rules. So, for example, you probably don't want to enable the social security number. There's special cases where that is required, but most merchants aren't going to need that, and the customer isn't going to feel comfortable giving it to them. We also have the ability to show merchant-defined fields, so you can require any of the 20 merchant-defined fields. Those aren't used that often, but for some established accounts, they want to make sure that merchant-defined field 1, for example, is entered. Maybe that's like a patient name if you're a doctor or something. Something like that could be there, but you don't generally have these. And then there's some more fields, such as fax, order description, just a few more ones that aren't used that often. Most people will select ones up here, and again, usually it's like customer name, the address, zip code, that sort of stuff. And then there's processor name. And so this doesn't really matter. It's just what the processor will be named and show as in the merchant's interface. It will also be used for the processor ID. It can be whatever you want though. So I'm just going to call this QWERTY processor, and then I can continue, or I can continue and add another credit card processor. So if I'm doing a multi-mid merchant, I can add multiple credit card processors during this setup. And so I could do this, in which case it would save this processor and then have me start over with the same form and choose a different processor. In this case, I'm just going to hit continue. Now, electronic checks are very similar. So again, you get a drop down with all the ones that you're able to use. If I select First Data Telecheck, you see a similar form. If you are using our in-house electronic check, that's going to be the first option on the list. And when you select that, it's going to say, do you want to set it to offered or active? And so that's the only setup. And so if you set it to offered, when the merchant logs into their account, they'll see electronic check in the main menu and be able to select it and sign up from there whenever they're ready. Or if you know they're going to use it, you can make it active, in which case you get a abbreviated version of the form we just looked at where you give it some credentials. I'm only going to do offered and then continue. And finally, we have cash processing. You can set it to offered or active. If you set it to active, there's some configuration where you can set currencies. You can drag currencies back and forth depending on what currencies you want them to do in cash. They have merchant-defined fields required and a processor name. Much less configuration because, again, this is just reporting. This isn't actually processing anything through a third party. Now, I'm actually going to skip this. I actually don't want them to do cash processing, so I'm going to skip this one for now. And now I get to choose what services the merchant is going to have. And so we list all of the services in alphabetical order. You can choose which ones to set to active, offered, or disabled. And we have some defaults here that are pretty sensible for each merchant. We're not going to set anything to active automatically, but some services like automatic card updater, customer vault, invoicing, these sorts of things, a lot of merchants will want to have, and so setting them to offered could make sense. You can always set them all to disabled, or if you know a merchant is going to need something, you can set it to active. So this one we're going to make sure has the customer vault and automatic card updater. Everything else we'll leave as offered or disabled. Additionally, a few services have video tutorials, so if you click the link to do that, you'll go to a new tab with a video demoing the service, so you can get some information on it. And some of them have info cards if you want to see just a little more information, again, at a glance. So we'll hit submit, and then the next step is setting the fee schedule for the merchant. And so you've got a couple settings here. You can choose whether or not the merchant sees their billing statement in the control panel. Typically you want to enable that. And do you want to send the merchant an email when their gateway fees are billed? Again, this is up to you. A lot of merchants like to get an email when they're billed, so you can check that or not, whether or not you want to. Then we have fee schedules. So what's the fee schedule you want them to be set for? And so this is a whole other topic that we can't get into in this video, but basically you can say, I want them to be on the custom test schedule, high fees, or I can do a custom fee schedule. And so then we load all the services you've set to active or offered, and then you can set custom pricing for each item. And so there's the resale price, which is what the merchant is going to pay. There's my cost, which is what your cost is to NMI. The difference, of course, will be your commission. And if there's a fee that you don't want the merchant to even know exists, you can check this Bill Me section here. And so if you want to, for example, say, I'm going to give you a merchant account, you're going to be processed through me, everything's great, and you're going to get free card updates. So you're going to be paying the automatic card updater fees on behalf of the merchant. What you can do is just check these three boxes, and now whenever fees for this service, for their setup fee, their monthly fee, or their per transaction fee, whenever those are generated by them using the service, we'll bill your affiliate account instead of the merchant. The merchant won't even know that those are fees that they're getting out of. As far as they're concerned, they aren't things they have to pay for at all. So this can be really nice if you're doing some sort of deal with a merchant or something like that. So I'm going to stick with that and then do continue. And now we show you a summary of the merchant account that you're creating. So you can complete the merchant account, and here's just some information. You can activate pending services immediately. So if you want the merchant to be active and billable immediately once you create them, you can check this box and hit create merchant. Or you can wait until they get the email and agree to the terms of service on their own, whichever works for you. Typically, we recommend just creating the merchant and letting them agree to the terms of service. You can also delete the account if you decide you actually don't want this one, or hit create, whichever you want. This is saved, so you can go back to your list of accounts and come back here if you want to decide later, if you want to actually send the email later. But once you hit create merchant, it's going to send the email to the new user. You can, of course, see all your information that you entered here. If you need to edit something, just hit the edit button, make any changes you want, and hit save. Those will all happen in real time. You can see all the processing services that you've set up for them. You can make edits here. You can change the billing info for a specific service. So if a specific service is going to be billed to a different bank account, you can do that. You can make changes. You can add, edit. You can add a credit card, check, or cash processor now if you want, if you forgot to add them in the initial setup. You can basically do all that stuff. And then the fee schedules are down here. All of that stuff is listed. So these are all the fees that you set for them. Again, we're on a custom fee schedule, so we list that here. If you wanted to say change that, we're not going to do a custom fee schedule. Instead, we're going to do the high fees one. Just hit continue, and that'll take you back to the summary page. And now we show you, oops, scrolled too far. We show you there on high fees, and then again, a list of all of those fees. So once you're ready, you can just hit create merchant. There we go. The merchant was activated successfully, and they'll receive an email within a couple seconds welcoming them to their new gateway account where they can set a password, agree to the terms of service, agree to the billing, and get processing. And now this merchant is fully ready to go.